The scent of CLP, cleaner, lubricant, preservative, was thick and metallic in the air-conditioned hangar bay, a scent that Montgomery knew better than perfume. Her focus was absolute, her world reduced to the serrations of the bolt carrier and the smooth, cold steel of the barrel extension. She ran a patch, soaked and wrung tight, through the massive bore of the Barrett M107A1, checking for carbon fouling one final, meticulous time. This rifle, heavy and brutal, was an extension of her own nervous system, and she treated it with the reverent detachment of a neurosurgeon prepping a scalpel. She wore no gloves. Her hands, though perfectly sized for the precision required, were deeply calloused, the skin thickened from years of heat, cold, and the relentless concussive slap of high-caliber recoil. A faint jagged scar traced the line of her right jaw up toward the ear, a silver thread visible against the tan skin, a physical receipt for a debt paid long ago in the dust of a forgotten outpost. Sergeant, a voice sliced through the humming silence of her concentration, a tone layered with easy, entitled authority. Montgomery did not look up, her discipline ingrained. She was seated on a folding canvas stool near the edge of the firing line, the Barrett disassembled across a protective mat. She knew the voice immediately, Vice Admiral Davis. He was not her commanding officer, nor was he even in her direct chain of command, which only served to amplify the casual disregard in his approach. He stopped directly beside her, his tailored uniform immaculate, contrasting sharply with the grime and honest wear on her own kit. "That's a magnificent piece of engineering," Davis continued, his voice intended to be appreciative but landing instead as possessive. He gestured towards the massive receiver. "Though I must say, seeing such a weapon broken down like this, it strikes me as overkill for these range drills you run." Montgomery finally lifted her eyes, meeting his gaze levelly. "Admiral, the M107A1 is never overkill, sir. It is a necessary certainty." Davis smirked, a patronizing lift of the lips. "A necessary certainty, yes. But let's be honest, Sergeant. Get your small hands off this man's gun. It's a beast of a rifle. It takes a different kind of strength, a different kind of heft to truly master the long reach of the .5 caliber." The insult, delivered with the soft, cushioned brutality only a high-ranking officer could employ, was designed to dismiss her entirely. It suggested that her precision was merely luck, that her expertise was fundamentally misapplied due to some inherent lack of physical scale or capacity. The air in the bay thickened, the pressure differential between their ranks almost palpable. Montgomery felt the familiar, cold knot tightening in her chest, the same tightening that used to precede the longest, loneliest walks back from the target acquisition point. She kept her expression neutral, her jaw fixed. She merely laid the cleaning rod down with surgical care and reached for the lubricant brush. She had endured worse, she had bled worse, she had killed worse. This was just arrogance wearing rank insignia. The Admiral's casual dismissal, however, was a splinter that drove deep, immediately transporting her back, not through memory, but through sensory overload. The smell of the CLP, the feel of the cold metal. It ripped her mind away from the hangar bay, substituting the sterile air for the scorching, suffocating heat of the Helmand province 7 years prior. It was Fob Chapman, not even a proper forward operating base, just a fortified position built hastily out of HESCO barriers and raw determination, deep in a valley that acted like a furnace during the day and a freezer at night. Her designation then was just Montgomery, though the call sign Viper was already beginning to stick, whispered first by the men who saw her patiently wait 4 days for a single confirmed target, and later shouted by the men whose lives she saved. Her weapon of choice then, as now, was the Barrett, but the deployment demanded versatility. I remembered the sheer physical cost of that time. Every day was a grueling rotation, carrying the HK-416 for patrol and close-quarters defense, then transitioning to the M107A1 for the real work, the overwatch, the deterrence, the necessary certainty. The difference in mass between the 5.56 assault rifle and the 15-kilogram payload of the .5 caliber felt like shifting tectonic plates every time she moved position. Her back ached constantly. Her shoulders were perpetually bruised. She lived on MREs, caffeine, and a grim determination to see her team through the deployment intact. The specific mission that forged her skill, the one that left the scar tracing her neck, was a retrieval operation for a downed communications team. They were pinned down, out in the open, at a range that tactical doctrine declared impossible for kinetic solutions. The initial estimated range was 2,000 meters. She knew, even before she laid the laser down, that she would have to push the limits of the rifle, the ammunition, and fundamental physics. She crawled into position on a rooftop that was radiating heat, the soles of her boots melting slightly onto the tarred surface. She lay prone for 3 hours, the sun beating down, turning the black rifle stock into a branding iron. The sweat running into her eyes wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the stillness required, the complete elimination of muscular tremor while her body screamed for water and movement. She had trained for extreme distance, understanding the factors that turned a straight line into an unforgiving curve. Spindrift, the mirage distortion rising off the hot ground, the sudden vicious shifts in the density altitude, and the Coriolis effect. The Coriolis effect. That was the ghost in the machine at ultra-long range. It wasn't just a concept reserved for meteorologists and naval artillery. At 2,200 meters, the final accurate distance she calculated, the simple rotation of the Earth beneath the bullet's flight path becomes a critical variable. A .5 caliber round spends approximately 3.2 seconds traveling that distance. In those 3.2 seconds, the Earth does not stand still. For a shot fired north in the northern hemisphere, the bullet begins to drift to the right. It's an infinitesimal deviation measured in thousands of degrees, but magnified over 2 kilometers, that deviation means the difference between a surgical strike and missing the target completely by meters. She ran the calculations in her head, double-checking the windage and elevation with the established dope card, then adding the complex variables. The wind was stable at 7 knots, full value right to left. That required a significant hold-off. The DA was high, meaning the air was thin, reducing drag, but requiring a slightly higher elevation due to reduced lift stabilization. Then the Coriolis correction. For 2,200 meters at their latitude, the calculation yielded an essential 0.8 mils of horizontal shift to the left, counteracting the natural drift of the Earth spin. She adjusted the Schmidt and Bender scope turret, the clicks loud in the oppressive silence surrounding her. Her spotter, a young Marine named Finn, was reading the atmospheres like a prayer book, his voice a ragged whisper. Target confirmed, moving to the structure entrance, Montgomery. 200 meters out, approaching now. You've got maybe 90 seconds before they're under cover. She settled the crosshairs. The target, a heavy machine gunner setting up an ambush point directly overlooking the trap team, was a tiny, indistinct speck, shimmering through the heat haze. The optical illusion of the mirage made it look like the ground was boiling, distorting the lower edges of the target. She had to time the shot precisely, utilizing the moment the mirage momentarily stabilized, trusting her internal clock and the external physics. She exhaled slowly, purging every drop of oxygen until her lungs were empty. She held the breath, holding the crosshair steady. The world narrowed to the reticle, the fine black lines defining the point where theory met reality. Thwump. She squeezed the trigger, maintaining perfect control against the expected, brutal recoil. The Barrett roared, a slow, terrifying detonation that momentarily pressurized the air around her. The force slammed her backward into the improvised sandbag rest. Then came the agonizing wait. The flight time was an eternity. She stayed locked on the target, watching the area through the haze of the blast, trusting the ballistic data, trusting the Coriolis correction. 3.2 seconds. Crack. The sound of the impact returned, sharp, definite, and delayed. The machine gunner crumpled instantly, falling directly onto his weapon, the kinetic energy of the Rafos Mark II-11 round proving the necessary certainty. The immediate chaotic response from the remaining hostile forces allowed the communications team just enough time to scramble to a defensible position, lives secured by a margin of physics and calculation. But the shot had come with a cost. The rapid rotation and recoil, magnified by the non-optimal firing angle she was forced to take on the uneven rooftop, caused the heavy rifle to whip back violently. The sharp edge of the cheek rest bracket, momentarily misaligned by the G-forces, caught the side of her neck, tearing the skin and leaving her momentarily stunned and bleeding profusely. It was a minor injury compared to the magnitude of the operation, but it was permanent. It was the mark of the 2,200-meter shot. The scar was the physical manifestation of her knowledge, the price of mastering the man's gun beyond the limits of conventional expectation. 7 years later, the insult from Vice Admiral Davis hit harder because it dismissed the pain, the exhaustion, and the absolute technical mastery required to survive that kind of high-stakes precision. Montgomery blinked, the searing heat of FOB Chapman dissolving back into the cool, fluorescent wash of the base hangar. Davis was still standing there, arms crossed, tapping his foot impatiently. "Well, Sergeant?" Davis pressed, seeing her momentary lapse into silence as hesitation. "Are you going to polish that thing all day, or are you going to address your admiral? I asked you to keep those small hands off the weapon." Montgomery finally stood up, moving slowly but deliberately.
She was shorter than the Admiral, but the tension radiating off her was immense. She picked up the partially assembled rifle body, the metal cool in her grasp. "Admiral, with respect," she said, her voice low and steady, "I am in the process of ensuring this weapon is mission-ready. The M107A1 demands precision handling, regardless of the size of the operator's hands. It demands respect for its power, not brute force." Davis took a step closer, violating her personal space, his arrogance escalating into physical provocation. He reached out, his polished leather glove intending to grip the fore-end of the Barrett, to take the rifle from her and inspect it as if it were a piece of equipment being mishandled by a subordinate laborer. It was the final line. Her discipline, honed by years of controlled violence, snapped the moment his fingers brushed the rifle's surface. Montgomery didn't move away. She didn't shout. She didn't resort to aggression. She simply asserted physics. Her calloused right hand, already wrapped around the rifle's chassis, tightened instantly. She applied pressure, a sudden, focused, isometric force that countered his attempt to seize the barrel. Davis was a large man, accustomed to being obeyed and having objects yield to his command. But the rifle did not budge. Her grip was iron, rooted, drawing strength from her core and leverage honed over thousands of hours of maintaining a perfect firing position. The instantaneous, unyielding resistance met his grasp with the immovable force of the mountain from which she derived her call sign. Davis's eyes widened slightly in surprise, then narrowed with immediate petulant fury. He pulled harder, intending to rip the rifle away. Montgomery maintained the counterpressure, her elbow locked, her stance slightly shifted to absorb his momentum. "That is an order, Sergeant. Release the weapon," Davis spat, his voice dropping below the level of the hangar's ambient noise, making the confrontation private and deeply humiliating for him. "Sir, the weapon is secured by the operator," Montgomery stated flatly. The physical exertion was minimal for her. Years of carrying this weight made his push feel like a mild inconvenience. She watched his knuckles whiten under the leather of his glove as he realized he was physically struggling against a soldier a full foot shorter than him, over a piece of equipment she was clearly mastering. Defeated by her silent, unwavering strength, Davis snatched his hand back, shaking it slightly, not from pain, but from the sudden, sharp realization of his failure to intimidate. "You believe you are capable of handling that rifle, Sergeant?" Davis challenged, his face flushed. He was searching desperately for a way to regain control and impose his rank over her obvious physical superiority in this discipline. "Very well, let us see what those small hands can truly achieve. I have 3 targets set up on the far range, 1,850 meters, steel plates approximately 10 centimeters square. If you can ring those 3 targets, I will consider your explanation adequate. If you fail, you will secure that weapon immediately and you will report to the armory for administrative duty until further notice." The challenge was ridiculous. 1,850 meters was not only extreme range, it was beyond the guaranteed effective range for even the specialized military match ammunition she carried. Moreover, the targets were deliberately small, forcing a level of precision that eliminated the possibility of error margin. He was not challenging her to shoot, he was challenging her to defy physics on demand. "Sir," Montgomery replied, her voice now edged with a lethal confidence, "I accept your challenge, but I require 5 minutes to finalize the weapon assembly and calibrate the optic." "You have 3 minutes," Davis snapped, checking his watch with theatrical impatience. "And when you fail to acquire, you will learn the cost of insubordination." Montgomery returned to the mat, the adrenaline clearing her mind completely. The memory of the 2,200-meter shot was no longer a ghost, it was her operating manual. She snapped the massive rifle back together with practiced speed, the final part seating with solid, satisfying clicks. The Vice Admiral's presence, the contempt of the junior officers who had gathered silently to watch the unfolding drama, the immense pressure, all faded into the background noise. The targets, 1,850 meters distant,
Were just beyond a rise in the terrain, set against the low, hazy horizon of the Mojave training grounds. The temperature was rising quickly in the bay, promising a volatile day outside. She checked the scope mount, ensuring the parallax was perfect. She inserted a fresh 10-round magazine of Raufoss Mk211, the explosive tip rounds reserved for armored vehicles and extreme threats. Davis stood behind her, watching the telemetry readout from the Rangemaster station. "Target 1 is a steel plate, Sergeant. Give me a clear indication when you are ready." Montgomery dropped prone, settling behind the massive rifle. The weight was familiar, comforting. Her cheek rested against the cool composite stock, her eye finding the optical centerline instantly. She ran the immediate environmentals. Wind, shifting, 8 knots from the 7 o'clock position, decreasing to 5 knots near the target area. A tricky transition wind that would drift the round early, then stabilize. Temperature, 28 degrees Celsius, rising. Humidity, low. Altitude, 700 meters above sea level. She calculated the elevation hold based on the 1,850-meter drop, dialing the required 52 MOA, minutes of angle, onto the turret. Then she factored in the critical horizontal shifts. Spin drift, the rightward push inherent in the bullet's rotation, required 1.5 mils left. The tricky crosswind required 2.8 mils left. And then the Earth's rotation. At 1,850 meters, over a flight time of approximately 2.7 seconds, the Coriolis correction was not negligible. It demanded an additional 0.6 mils left to compensate for the terrestrial movement underneath the projectile. Total calculated hold, 4.9 mils left of the target centerline. She took the first target. It was a simple steel plate, the largest of the challenge. She inhaled deeply, then slowly exhaled, letting the sight settle. The crosshair, already dialed onto the necessary elevation, was now held far to the left of the target, seemingly pointing into open space. He thinks I am compensating only for the wind. He is not factoring in the world turning beneath us. She waited for the precise moment the wind reading stabilized, the flag near the target area momentarily slackening. Thwump. The rifle fired, the shockwave rolling over Davis and the assembled spectators. The weight was excruciating, but Montgomery stayed perfectly still, watching the trajectory. 2.7 seconds later, the distinct metallic clang echoed back across the desert. Target 1 was struck dead center. The sound resonated through the bay. A few junior officers exchanged wide-eyed looks. Davis stiffened. He hadn't expected a first-round hit, certainly not one requiring such extreme offset. Target 2, Davis commanded, his voice now slightly sharper, betraying the crack in his composure. A smaller plate. And Sergeant, you have a 5-knot wind shear approaching your position. The wind was increasing, but more dangerously, it was swirling. The calculation was no longer linear. Montgomery quickly glanced at the ranging data, then manually compensating, adjusting her wind hold to 3.1 mils left. But she knew the Admiral was trying to rush her. She had a new challenge. Davis had anticipated her ability to compensate for wind and drop, but for the remaining 5 shots, he had ordered the rangemaster to place small, standard poker chips beneath the steel plates, acting as micro-targets. The remaining 5 targets were placed extremely close together, spread out horizontally, forcing her to rapidly acquire and fire, eliminating the time needed for precise scope turret adjustments between shots. "Change of orders, Sergeant," Davis announced, his authority now desperately clinging to the rules of engagement. Target 2 is followed by 4 distinct separate targets, all requiring immediate engagement. You will fire 6 rounds, 1 on each target, within 60 seconds. Rapid acquisition. This is a practical range test. He was forcing her to hold off entirely on the reticle, using the internal stadia lines for all corrections, rather than relying on precise turret clicks. This required instantaneous mental calculation of complex physics under extreme duress. Montgomery nodded once, adjusting her position minimally. The first 3 targets were steel plates. The final 3 were almost impossible, playing cards taped to a drum, requiring a hit within millimeters to secure a kill. She chambered the next round. Target 2. Still at 1,850 meters, but located 50 meters to the right of the first target. This meant the elevation drop remains constant, but the horizontal calculation changed dramatically due to the angle and the subtle shift in the rotational vector of the Earth. She held her breath and fired. Clang. Target 2 vaporized, hitting just above the center line. Perfect. Now for the rapid-fire sequence. The clock was running. Target 3 was 20 meters further right, wind steady. Coriolis required a 0.5 mil adjustment right from the previous hold to accommodate the new angle relative to the axis of rotation, plus the required shift for the wind.
She racked the bolt instantly, the heavy casing ejecting onto the mat. She didn't look at the ejected brass. She acquired, aimed at the now calculated offset point in the empty space beside the target, and squeezed. Clang. Target 3 confirmed. She moved to target 4. This was a playing card now. Total focus was required. The wind was gusting slightly, 6 knots, full value. She adjusted the hold on the reticle, shifting down 0.5 mil to compensate for the air pocket lift. Her finger was already on the trigger, her eye absorbing the visual data faster than the rangemaster could announce the conditions. Thwump. 2.7 seconds later, the sound of the impact returned. Not a clang, but a sharp, wet thwack, the round shredding the card and hitting the wood frame beneath it. Confirmed hit. Target 5 was the hardest. It was a card taped low near the ground. This forced her to consider the mirage again, blurring the low edge, increasing the difficulty of judging the subtle elevation drop required. The extreme prone position she was forced into put immense strain on her neck muscles, causing a sharp, familiar ache that ran up into the scar tissue. She ignored it. This pain was the currency of her expertise. She racked the bolt, the action smooth and practiced. She calculated the new Coriolis offset, holding 5.1 mils to the left, slightly more than the previous target due to a minor shift in trajectory projection. Thwump. Another sharp thwack. Hit confirmed. 5 targets down. Only 1 target remained. Target 6. It was the furthest target, located 1,865 meters out, slightly further downrange than the previous 5. Davis had kept the most complex variable for last. The increased distance meant increased flight time, which meant the Coriolis effect would be magnified even further. She did not touch the elevation turret. She simply lifted her head half an inch off the stock to recalibrate the data, then dropped back down. Davis was watching her, his jaw tight, realizing with chilling certainty that he had completely underestimated her. She wasn't just hitting targets. She was demonstrating a command of physics that was reserved for the highest echelons of specialized warfare. The flight time for 1,865 meters was now 2.74 seconds. That small fraction of time translated into an increase in the required horizontal correction. She adjusted her internal calculation instantly, 0.8 mils for Coriolis, 3.5 mils for windage, total 4.3 mils left holdoff. She centered the crosshair on the invisible point in the air, far from the target. She squeezed the final round. Thwump! The concussion was less a sound and more a physical strike. Silence descended upon the hangar bay. The junior officers who had initially smirked at the Admiral's challenge were now statues. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the confirmation, waiting for the sound that would define the next trajectory of Montgomery's career and Davis's reputation. The sound took longer to return than the others. It traveled across the 1.8 kilometers of sun-baked Earth, a final, definitive whisper of force. Thwack! Target 6 confirmed. 6 rounds, 6 impossible hits, executed in under 55 seconds, each shot requiring a unique, real-time ballistic solution incorporating the rotation of the planet. Montgomery did not move immediately. She simply let the massive rifle settle, her breathing returning to a slow, controlled rhythm. The silence in the bay stretched, becoming thin and brittle under the intense pressure of the Admiral's shattered authority. Davis, the decorated vice admiral, was visibly undone. His immaculate uniform suddenly looked too tight, his posture rigid. He stared at the readout screen, which displayed the target confirmation data in merciless green type. T1, T2, T3, T4, T5, T6, all destroyed. He had sought to prove her smallness, and instead, she had demonstrated the vastness of her operational skill. He was pale, the blood draining from his face as he realized the depth of his mistake. This sergeant wasn't just skilled. She was a world-class precision instrument, a weapon of lethal calculation, a soldier operating at a level of technical mastery that few men, and certainly not he, could ever approach. The arrogance that had fueled his challenge had evaporated, replaced by a cold, gut-wrenching terror of being exposed as tactically naive in front of his subordinates. Slowly, reluctantly, Davis turned back toward Montgomery. Her eyes, magnified slightly by the scope housing she had just lifted her head from, were steady, patient, and utterly devoid of triumph. She was simply awaiting her next order, the mission complete. Davis opened his mouth to speak, but the words failed him. He swallowed hard, adjusting the collar of his uniform as if it were choking him. The weight of his rank, which he had wielded so carelessly moments before, now felt like a crushing burden of shame.
Sergeant Montgomery, Davis finally managed, his voice thin and hollow, a mere echo of the commanding tone he had used earlier. He looked at the .50 caliber resting in her hands, no longer seeing a piece of hardware, but seeing the immense, unforgiving calculus she performed to bring that force to bear. I apologize, Sergeant. My assessment of your capacity was wholly inaccurate. He paused, struggling to find the appropriate closure for this public defeat. He did not extend his hand. He would not dare touch the weapon again. Instead, he snapped to attention, his back straight, his eyes locking onto a point just above her head. He raised his right hand to his brow, delivering a crisp, sharp, full military salute. Carry on, Sergeant. That is all. Montgomery, still in the prone position, returned the salute with the same level of flawless precision, her expression unreadable. She lowered her hand, then immediately turned back to the Barrett. She picked up the lubricant brush she had been using before the interruption, dipping it into the CLP. She ignored the Admiral completely as he pivoted sharply, his humiliation preceding him as he strode quickly out of the hangar bay. The scar on her neck throbbed faintly, a reminder that respect is never given, it is always taken, often at great personal expense. She returned to the methodical cleaning process, the scent of the CLP once again defining her world, the silent promise of necessary certainty restored. If you believe respect is earned by blood and not by rank, type respect in the comments.